that is the only moment in time there is right now. Thank you so much for being here. We're actually going to get started kind of on time. We have a few things to check in about before the big check-in. There's a couple of seats at front for people who have chronic pain or disabilities, elderhood, whatever, where you need to sit, I believe. We're asking that people try and keep the laneways full, just so that people can make it through who use mobility devices. There's an altar in the back that you can sit with and offer things to. There is this timeline that you can at any time get up and have a moment in your own personal healing justice histories or the ones of your collective. We're good looking, and y'all are good looking, we're good looking, everybody's good looking. Are we saying it's full? Was that the last thing? Not yet? Not yet? Not yet? Okay, we'll see. Okay, so we got a minute. Maria's is here to full. Okay, hi. So welcome to the session that's called Healing Justice Lineages, a Story Circle. I want to say I'm Alex Trebek, but that's not real. I'm Leah Pieshna Summer-Singer. I'm going to be facilitating this thing with the amazing geniuses from this panel with me and all of you in this room. Before we start, we want to acknowledge that we are on Anishinaabe territory, that healing justice is at its core work against settler colonialism all over the world, and that all of us are decolonizing ourselves, our bodies, and our communities through doing this work, and in being in alliance with indigenous communities and accomplishment, and working under treaty law, and working for the liberation of this land. So that, I had a whole lot of shit I was going to say. So here's what's going to happen. I'm going to talk a little bit about why we all collectively decided that we wanted to do this panel. We're all going to introduce ourselves and talk a little bit about who we are, the work we've done, and then go into some questions, challenges, I don't know what the hell to do about this, visions for the future, and then we're going to open up to y'all because we don't want to just talk to you for 90 minutes because, as I just said in my, sleep deprived state, I'm we could be Einstein meets Audre Lorde and everyone will still go to sleep if we talk to you for 90 minutes. We're all folks who've been involved in the healing justice movement in different ways. Detroit is a place where this thing that's known as healing justice has a lot of deep roots, from the United States Social Forum in 2010, where there's a Healing Justice People's Movement Assembly that was foundational for so many of us. From the year after year of the healing justice practice spaces and network gatherings that have happened here, Detroit has been a place where people have come together to learn and share about healing. It is also a Black, Native, and POC city where people have been healing long before healing justice was the word that was termed. And healing justice is not something that has just happened in the past decade. Our grandparents have been doing it, our great-great-great-parents have been doing it, our ancestors that we don't remember anymore, but we remember, have been liberating ourselves through healing. There are so many ways to be a healer. Everyone in this room is a healer. Because it's important to name histories, it's important for us to name that healing justice as a current movement, word, whatever you want to call it, started in the South by Black people, by Black femmes, by indigenous femmes, by Black and brown, queer and trans, non-binary, sex-working, disabled people. And it was invented as a term to counter all the violence that we see in the white, Western, ableist, medical, industrial complex, and also the stuff that happens when white people steal our traditions and sell them back to us for $300 and tell us that we need to pay to go take trainings in it. It is about building a movement, not about a buzzword or something to put on a resume. And it's a work in progress. So I happen to, how do you know me? So this is a moment where we're also fighting to make sure our histories don't get erased. And we know that as Black and brown people, we invent stuff, and our histories of that work get erased all the time, and it gets co-opted. And we're in a moment where I can remember 10 years ago, no one in my movements talked about healing. I had my altar in the closet. I was that weirdo who made tinctures, and now it's a really different time and place with the cutie BIPOC bleach revolution on Instagram, with like so much healing being brought into our movements. And we still have so many questions about what the future is going to be like. Did I get everything?
Wow.
Cool, okay, that's it. I'm going to sit down. Live stream. Oh, I said it's on Facebook. It's on the Facebook event. Yes. Okay, without further ado, I'm just going to pass it over to Karen. You want to start?
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
I just want to honor and name the survivors and healers and practitioners who have come before us. Those who have studied deeply and brought forth such important and valuable practices to the work of healing justice. I want to lift up the boarding school healing project of Indigenous tribal nations. I want to lift up the project against project against biocolonialism, and the deep rigor and study of trauma, generational and historical trauma of the transatlantic slave trade. For myself, as a reproductive justice, racial justice, queer, trans, POC, organizer, healer, witch, magician, as a survivor of state, interpersonal, and communal violence, I wanted to understand in the late 90s, where do we hold the trauma of generations in the global South? After working deeply in HIV/AIDS, working deeply in the anti-violence movement, and working around healing using sound to break through manifestations of trauma in the body, especially for Black and women of color, trans and cis women of color. I believe that our work to transform attempted genocide for queer and trans folks, for people of color, indigenous, people with disabilities, survivors of being imprisoned and institutionalized, from a legacy of being experimented on for the medical industrial complex as an extension of state control and violence, and based on an ideology that sees us as animals, less than human, unfit, and only here to reproduce for capitalism. The Kindred Southern Healing Justice Collective was conceived in 2004. It came out of after a couple of years of sitting with elders in African American and Latinx communities in the Southeast, I was asking the question, what did we do with trauma, generational trauma during the Civil Rights Movement, the Black Nationalist Movement, the American Indian Movement, the Puerto Rican Movement, the Latinx student movement, and they said, well, you know, we were just surviving, moving through it. There's no really one way to do it. And I said, well, how do we integrate it now? And they said, some of my elders said, well, we don't have time. So I kept asking the question, and then Hurricane Katrina and Hurricane Rita came. And it was a moment and a pause, because suddenly we had to hold brief. We were witnessing the live lynchings of our people on television. I'm not talking about the storm. I'm talking about the natural disaster of state police, the persecution, the absolute violence, and the murdering of people on television in the Gulf Coast and in the South and in New Orleans. After that, we believed strongly in the role of wellness, healing, and transformation. And I got calls from elders who said, wait a minute, this reminds me of what I felt like during the Civil Rights Movement. I'm disassociating, and something here is changing in my body, in our collective bodies. So how do we lean into this trauma and this grief as integral to our survival and political liberation? And so we started to inform and center practices and traditions of healing as we were moving towards the first United States Social Forum in 2007 in Atlanta, Georgia. And there we co-created with Indigenous, LGBTQ, POC, environmental justice organizers, and looked at the tenets, the principles of environmental justice created in the Global South as our center point for how we would hold healing and wellness at the Atlanta, Georgia U.S. Social Forum. We created a healing, justice, and spiritual practice space, and for a year did a call out to national healers, some of them here, therapists, other practitioners, who could hold a space of what we expected of 10,000 people to descend on the U.S. Social Forum, and how we would hold them to create another world as possible by honoring and centering healing and transforming generational trauma as political liberation. We worked and guided and tended to that powerful space. What's important to know is disability justice, harm reduction, LGBTQ liberation, racial justice, and Indigenous elders helped us create that space. What's important to know is we were doing organizing with environmental justice organizers as part of an extension of Healing Justice, we were not just holding practice space. So by the time we got to Detroit, we were fighting for water rights as part of the Healing Justice practice space. We were fighting for housing. It was asked of each core team member at the U.S. Social Forum in 2010 here that we go to at least one action that held up environmental justice here in Detroit. We were heavily informed by the Global South, by traditions of feminists, of indigenous and feminists of color throughout the Global South, by the disability justice movement, by the transformative justice movement, and by LGBTQ liberation. We were heavily engaging with harm reduction models, safety, wellness that expanded physical, spiritual, emotional, and psychic and environmental well-being. And we sought to lift up our collective bodies as an extension, as a legacy of centuries of responding to genocide. I'll close with this. The Kindred Southern Healing Justice Collective began building a network of Southern healers to respond to the incidents of what we call natural disasters, which included the institutionalization of people in our communities. It included policing, it included detainment, it included pathologizing Black and brown LGBTQ youth, people with disabilities, people formerly incarcerated, so on and so forth. We partnered with Southerners on New Ground, we partnered with Project South, and we began to answer the call of grief, trauma, and safety in our movements. For us, it was a political framework to engage across multiple movements. It was not to create its own movement, because what we were trying to challenge is that every movement has to hold generational trauma and collective survival and safety for our people. We had a statement, one last thing, in 2007 at the U.S. Social Forum, which I think Anjali's going to touch on, we created 3 things that you need to know about. I already mentioned the environmental justice organizing that we did. 2, actually 4 things. We created harm reduction models. There are people on the ground holding substance abuse spaces that did not persecute people who were using and had places to exchange needles. That was underground. We did it well. We did it safely. 3, we had mobile wellness teams that integrated traditional, Western-based and traditional doctors, healers, and therapists. They worked in integral teams, and we moved them around the space for the organizers of the U.S. Social Forum, as well as for community members that were participating. This was new information. Charity Hicks, who was a nurse down on the ground here and a healer in Detroit, introduced me for a year to doctors and healers that trusted that model. We lost people. People threatened to take us to the police. They threatened to take people's licenses because we were trying to do an integrative model that honored the emotional, spiritual, psychic well-being. And these models are something that we know to be true from the past, but not valued in the present. And it was the first People's Movement Assembly on Healing and Health Justice, a convening of over 100 healers, nurses, doctors, birth workers, environmental justice, disability justice organizers, fighting against the medical industrial complex, demanding for not only the survival, but for to uplift that all of our collective bodies. How do we honor the parts of us? We're not going for wholeness. It's bullshit. Wholeness is based on a white, wealthy, able-bodied, cis, heterosexual idea of what wealthy is.
Building on some of what Kara most recently stated, well, at first I want to take a step back and honor Charity Hicks, who also taught me so much when I came to the 2010 Social Forum, and was a huge part of why the work that went on there was so successful as an experiment in trying to bring together healers and medics and nurses and docs and move forward integrative response teams. Like Kara mentioned, there was a lot of tension in building towards that, and in the last month, 2 months beforehand, there was a huge break with some of the docs who were going to be working with the healers, and a sense that their licenses would be pulled or taken away if they participated in such kind of response teams. And Charity and Adrienne Marie Brown and Kara Page and a couple other folks reached out to me. Healing justice practice spaces, but in other iterations to try to, and now it feels so critically important to have different kinds of response teams to anything, to think about safety differently. I want to just share that I'm honored to be up here with this team of folks, and I'm also want to lift up many healers and organizers and healthcare professionals who have been doing this work. We have been side by side doing this work and who are not here. So, but we hope that we're a pretty cool sample. In 2007, after being involved with a radical women of color bloggers group, of which some folks are here, and which AMC was kind of a gathering point for, in 2007, a couple of friends and I put forward a website called curethis.org. And it was media making, gosh, 11 years ago. And it was a place where healers and healthcare professionals come together and reflect on the medical industrial complex, or talk about new systems or things they wanted to design, or be able to kind of dream together. At that time, a lot of the blogs were either chronic disease focused, like one specific condition, or written by doctors who were angrily talking about their patients, or written about health policy issues. And so it felt important at that time, and it's funny, we were just talking about it recently, maybe it feels important now to bring it back, or to bring something like it back.
Yes.
But the idea behind that was really to have a space to come together and dream. And then I was really excited to meet everyone at this table, 2007 and forward. I currently am the executive director of a clinic in Albuquerque, a clinic called Casa de Salud. It was founded in 2004 as a collaboration among traditional women healers. It's part of the Kalpuli Iskali collective in the South Valley of Albuquerque, as well as a physician and a nurse practitioner and volunteers from the community. I came in a couple of years later and had been in and out for various reasons once, but I've been there now a total of 6 years, and I'm the director there. And we are trying to continue designing what we've been dreaming and what we feel like makes sense as a response to colonialist medicine, as a response to generational trauma and poverty, and as a way to lift up cultural-rooted practices and connect people together instead of pathologize them. So we've got 12 clinicians now. We've got Western medicine clinicians, doctors versus PAs. We have a doctor of Oriental medicine. We have a Reiki master. We have a massage therapist. We're going to have two. We even have two specialists on our team. And we also do indigenous-based healing circles for folks struggling with opiate addictions. We have a syringe exchange on site, so folks who are active drug users can come and in a dignified manner be able to exchange their syringes for new syringes. And we are continuing to build our work and checking ourselves, but we hope to become not only a clinic which is rooted in our community, but a place where folks
move through. 1, 2, 3. Thank you. Okay, I'm Adela Nieves Martinez. I'm with Healing by Choice in Detroit by way of New York, by way of Puerto Rico. I want to lift up that there's a Healing Justice delegation here from Puerto Rico right now in a time when there's crisis and also celebration and joy. And I want to lift that up in this room too. That not only are we in grief and trauma, but that we're in celebration. Hard to have come off the island. That's particular, but I know that it's hard for all of us to have left our homes and our neighborhoods and our communities and our families. So I want to thank you, and I'm in deep gratitude for all of you being here in the room. I'm still shaking. Thank you. I will just say this, that I was part of the U.S. Social Forum in Detroit, part of helping organize
those complex systems falling apart. How do we have a system that those systems can fall apart into? And so our project was very much looking at